The Book of Joshua and the Book of Judges are two books in the Old Testament of the Christian Holy Bible. The Book of Joshua describes how Joshua, who was an aide to Moses, was commanded by God to lead the Israelites into the land of the Hittites, or the Promised Land, and claim the land. The Promised Land consists of the Egyptian Empire and Mesopotamia, which is inhabited by 7 Canaanite tribes spread across 31 city-states, each city-state having its own leader. Joshua leads his people on the conquest of Canaan with an objective to take these city-states. On this conquest, Joshua is faced with crossing the Jordan River, and he is also forced into battles, including the siege of Jericho and the siege of Gibeon. Joshua must then divide the land among the Israelites. The Book of Judges describes how the 12 tribes of Israel face the challenges of living peacefully among one another and withstanding attacks from foreign armies. The Book of Judges also describes how God answers the prayers of the Israelites by raising up leaders or judges for the tribes. Shortly after the death of Moses, Joshua, who was an aide to Moses, received a promise from God that he would be able to take the Promised Land without being harmed and give it to his people, the Israelites. God commanded Joshua to be firm and steadfast, and not to be dismayed as he carries out this task. Joshua obeyed God's commands and ordered the officers of his people to prepare the others to cross the Jordan River into the Promised Land. As Joshua and the Israelites approached the Jordan River, the water miraculously stopped flowing and allowed Joshua and his people to cross the river easily and approach Jericho. When Joshua and the Israelites arrived at Jericho, he received yet another command from God to march his people around the walls of Jericho 1 time every day for 6 days, and then 7 times on the 7th day. Joshua obeyed the commands, and after marching on the 7th day, the walls of Jericho crumbled to the ground, and the Israelites attacked the city and successfully took it. After conquering Jericho, Joshua sent 3,000 of his soldiers to Ai to conquer it. But because Achan, a man from the tribe of Judah, had taken treasure from Jericho that God had forbidden, the Israelites were punished by God and suffered a defeat at Ai. Achan was then punished by the Israelites for the misery he had inflicted on them by Joshua commanding all of the Israelites to stone him to death and bury his body under stones. After punishing Achan, Joshua then took all of his people to attempt to take Ai a second time. This time, he commanded 30,000 of his soldiers to set up an ambush at the rear of the city. Joshua then took the rest of his people to the front of the city and pretended to flee from the city as the soldiers of Ai chased them. When the city was empty of soldiers, Joshua's soldiers ambushed the rear of the city and set it on fire. When Joshua saw that the city was burning, he stopped fleeing and faced the soldiers of Ai. Joshua successfully defeated the entire population of Ai, which consisted of 12,000 men and women. After capturing Jericho and Ai, the Gibeonites decided to make an alliance with the Israelites so that they wouldn't be attacked. Joshua decided to allow them to be his allies, but forced them to be slaves for the Israelites. The king of Jerusalem heard about the Gibeonites' alliance with the Israelites, and so he asked the 5 Amorite kings to attack Gibeon. The 5 Amorite kings consisted of the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon. Joshua was informed of this planned attack and set up an ambush to face the Amorite kings and their soldiers. Joshua defeated many of the soldiers, and the rest of the soldiers fled. But as they fled, God commanded great stones from the sky to fall on top of the soldiers. These stones crushed more of the soldiers than Joshua had defeated himself. The 5 Amorite kings, however, escaped and took refuge in a cave. Joshua pursued these kings and captured them, in the cave and eventually executed them in front of all of the Israelites. Joshua continued his conquest into southern Canaan, where he conquered the cities Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, and Eglon. Joshua also conquered Hebron, Debir, and the mountain regions of Negeb. After conquering southern Canaan, Joshua completed his conquest by capturing northern Canaan. After claiming all of the land that God had promised him, Joshua then had to divide the land equally among the Israelites. Joshua did not divide the promised land up until he grew very old and was commanded by God to do so. But before he could divide the land, he was informed by God that a large part of the promised land was yet to be conquered. Joshua then sent the Israelites to conquer and claim the remainder of the land. After the land was claimed, it was divided into different regions and was given to the different tribes that made up the Israelites. After his conquest, the division of the promised land, and the events that followed, Joshua died at the age of 110 and was buried in the mountain region of Ephraim. The Israelites had served God during Joshua's entire lifetime, and also during the lifetimes of the elders who had outlived Joshua. The book of Judges comes after the book of Joshua in the Old Testament because the book of Judges basically follows up on what happened to the Israelites after the death of Joshua. The book of Judges also describes the different judges or leaders that were brought up by God to lead the Israelites. The book of Judges begins when God appointed Judah to continue fighting the Canaanites that Joshua had not defeated in his conquest. Judah fought alongside the rest of the Israelites against the remaining Canaanites, but even after defeating most of them, some of the Canaanites survived and lived among the Israelites. As time went on, later generations of Israelites arose, and these generations did not know God as well as the previous generations of Israelites in the Promised Land. Instead of following God, some of these Israelites followed the God of the Canaanites and Phoenicians. This angered God, and so he stopped protecting the Israelites from their enemies. After being oppressed by their enemies, God eventually delivered the Israelite judges to lead and protect them. But instead of following the judges, the Israelites continued to turn away from God. Eventually, the Israelites became so oppressed by their enemies that God delivered them a savior, Othniel. Othniel, whose name means Lion of God, was the son of Caleb and the brother of Kenaz. During his time as a judge, he battled against the king of Aram and successfully defeated him. After defeating the king of Aram, the Promised Land was at rest for 40 years until Othniel's death. After Othniel, the son of Jerah, Ehud, judged the Israelites. As a judge, Ehud defeated Eglon, king of Moab, by deceiving him. Ehud pretended that he was presenting the king a message from God as a tribute, but instead he stabbed the king with a dagger. Ehud also defeated 10,000 Moabites. After the defeat of the Moabites, the Promised Land remained at rest for 80 years. After the death of each judge, the Israelites continued to anger God, and before Deborah became a judge, the Israelites were greatly oppressed by Sisera and his 900 steel chariots. Deborah, wife of Lapidoth, went along with Barak and defeated Sisera and his army of 900 chariots. Abimelech was the next judge of the Israelites. He was considered an evil judge, though, because he killed all of his brothers except his youngest one. After 3 years as a judge, a few citizens of Shechem, which was the city Abimelech lived in, planned to ambush and kill Abimelech because of what he did to his brothers. Before these citizens were able to kill him, he got word of the ambush and attacked the city of Shechem and killed all who were in it. After destroying Shechem, Abimelech proceeded to the city of Thebez to capture it. But while he was attacking, a woman dropped a stone off a tower onto his head, fracturing his skull. Abimelech did not want to die at the hands of a woman, so he ordered one of his servants to kill him with a sword. After angering God once again, God sent the Israelites Jephthah. Jephthah allowed the Israelites to be delivered from the oppression of the Ammonites. Jephthah also made a vow to God that if God allowed him to defeat the Ammonites, God could take the life of whoever first greeted Jephthah when he returned from battle. After battling the Ammonites, Jephthah returned home and then was greeted by his only daughter, so she was sacrificed to God. After angering God yet another time, God discontinued protecting the Israelites from the Philistines. For 40 years the Israelites were at the mercy of the Philistines before Samson was born. Samson is one of the most well-known and significant judges of Israel. Samson was given to a woman from Zorah as a gift from God. And God told the woman that Samson would be the one who would deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. When Samson came of age, he traveled to Timnah, where he saw a Philistine woman that he wished to make his wife. When he returned from Timnah, he spoke to his father about the woman, and so Samson, his mother, and his father traveled back to Timnah to find the woman. As they traveled, Samson was attacked by a lion, but because of his strength, he killed the lion with his bare hands. Samson eventually found the woman, and as he was traveling with her back to his home, he stopped near the carcass of the lion he had defeated earlier to examine it. Upon examining it, he found a swarm of bees and honey inside of it, so he scooped out the honey and gave it to his father. Samson then angered his father by asking him a difficult riddle that he could not answer. So his father threatened to kill his new wife if Samson did not tell him the answer. Instead of killing her though, Samson's father gave Samson's wife to the man who was the best man at their wedding. When Samson heard about this, he was angered, so he burned the crops of the Philistines, and in turn the Philistines burned the woman who he had been married to, and her family. Samson then took revenge on the Philistines and killed 1,000 men using the jawbone of a donkey as a weapon. Samson eventually fell in love with another Philistine woman named Delilah. When the Philistine leaders heard of this, they had Samson arrested. It was very difficult to arrest Samson because of his great strength, and so the Philistine leaders used Delilah to their advantage and had her find Samson's weakness. So Delilah betrayed him, and after finding that the only way to weaken Samson was to shave the hair off of his head, she told the Philistine leaders, and so they shaved his head and gouged out his eyes. Samson was then in prison, but as he was in prison, his hair started to grow back. The Philistines were so happy that they finally captured Samson that they brought him out of the prison so everyone could see him. They placed him between two giant pillars that were holding up the temple. Samson then used the rest of his strength that he had regained from growing his hair to push the pillars down. And when the pillars fell, the rest of the temple crumbled down, killing himself and more Philistines than he had ever killed before. Samson was one of the final judges to serve God and the Israelites. The book of Joshua and the book of Judges explain in detail how the promised land came to be and how Joshua claims it after the death of Moses. These books also explain how the Israelites were led about as they inhabited the promised land and by whom they were led by, including one of the most important judges of Israel, Samson.